Hey friends, it's Tomer, and we just got another Duskmourn Commander precon revealed today. This is Miracle Worker. It's an Enchantress Miracle deck, and this is the first ever precon focused on the Miracle mechanic. So in this video, we're going to be checking out the full deck list, starting with the 10 brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck, and then we're going to be checking out the rest of the deck, the reprints. But before we begin, 3 quick reminders. First, you can find all previews as they are being released over at mtgpreviews.com. Number 2, you can purchase all these sweet new cards from Duskmourn over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. And number 3, if you like this sort of content, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll never miss a video. All right, we start with the face commander that kind of tells you what this deck is all about. This is Aminatou, Veil Piercer. It's a 4-mana Esper legendary creature human wizard. It's a 2/4 that says at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 2, and each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4 mana. So for those who don't know, Miracle says you may cast a card for its Miracle cost when you draw it if it's the first card you drew this turn. So if on your draw step, if you draw an enchantment card, you can immediately reveal the card and cast it for 4 less mana, but also you can do that on anybody's turn. So the first card you draw on your opponent's turn, you can then cast it for its Miracle cost, which lets you bypass typical timing restrictions on those spells. So Aminatou cares about enchantments and about the first card that you draw on each turn, not just your own. And her payoff is incredibly powerful mana advantage. Your spells can cost up to 4 less, and she also allows you to cast at instant speed, as now your enchantments without flash can actually be cast on your opponent's turn as long as you meet the Miracle requirement. So Aminatou kind of tells you what the rest of the deck wants to be doing. It's an Enchantress deck, but it's an Enchantress deck focused on miracling out your enchantments. So some of the cards are going to be setting up ways to miracle easier. Brainstorm, for example, is both amazing at drawing at instant speed so that you can trigger Miracle on your opponent's turn, but also setting up the top of your library to make sure that you have enchantments on top of your library at any given time. Like if you have an enchantment in your hand, you can just put it on top of your library so that when you draw it, you can then miracle it out. And then the deck is also filled with a bunch of enchantments, especially on the higher end, because Aminatou gives you as much as a 4 cost reduction. So for example, miracling out Extravagant Replication, it's a 6 mana spell, but if you miracle it out with Aminatou, it only costs 2 mana, which is an incredible mana discount. And obviously Aminatou's upkeep ability of Surveilling 2 also helps set up your miracle turns. So the deck is going to be focused heavily on top deck manipulation, drawing cards at instant speed, and of course enchantments that you're going to be miracling out. The secondary commander is also Enchantress, but very different style of Enchantress. This is not Miracle at all. This is the Master of Keys. It's an Esper commander that is white, blue, black, and X. And it's a legendary enchantment creature horror. It's a 3/3 with flying, and it says when it enters, put X +1/+1 counters on it and mill twice X cards. Each enchantment card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So this is an Enchantress Graveyard Matters style card, right? It doesn't really care about the miracle mechanic. It doesn't care about the top card of your library. It doesn't care about drawing at instant speed or anything like that. No, it wants to self-mill to put a whole bunch of enchantments in your graveyard and then allows you to cast those enchantments directly from the graveyard. Think of it as a permanent Underworld Breach, but only for enchantments. So it doesn't have perfect synergy with the main themes of the deck, which is definitely Miracle and Enchantress. It only focuses on Enchantress really, but you can kind of take the Master of Keys, put it in the command zone, and then upgrade and tweak the deck to make it, instead of a Miracle deck, into an Enchantress Graveyard deck. And certain cards that you'd like to be introducing to the deck that are not in the precon, the stock precon, are stuff like enchantments that also self-mill you or give you payoffs for having full graveyards. Like Ripples of Undeath is just a mill 3 every single turn for 2 mana, which is great, and can also be card advantage. And then Case of the Shifting Visage is just surveil 1, so it can only put up to 1 card into your graveyard at any given time. However, once you have 15 or more cards in your graveyard, it's just an incredibly mana efficient copy ability for all your non-legendary creature spells. And the Master of Keys once you cast it a single time, you can probably solve Case of the Shifting Visage like immediately. So those are like really good cards that you can take the Master of Keys. You would have to adjust the precon to make it more of a Graveyard style deck with the Master of Keys. That's why it's not as good as the Face Commander leading the stock list, but it is a very interesting and different way of taking the stock list with a couple tweaks. Now we got 8 other brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck, and we're going to be starting with Ancient Cellarspawn. This is a 3 mana black enchantment creature horror. It's a 3/3 that says each spell you cast that's a demon, horror, or nightmare costs 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana to cast it was less than its mana value, target opponent loses life equal to the difference. So I checked the list, and there's not actually a lot of demons, horror, or nightmare cards in the deck. I think there's like 6-ish that can benefit from Ancient Cellarspawn, so you're not really ramping too much with this card in the stock list. However, Aminatou gives a massive discounts to all your enchantments that you miracle out, and thus Ancient Cellarspawn is actually not like a ramp engine in this deck, but rather a pseudo finisher in the deck. It lowers your opponent's life total. So whenever you're miracling with Aminatou or just the miracle spells in the deck, Ancient Cellarspawn is going to lower a lot of your opponent's life totals repeatedly. So it's not like maximum value in this deck really, because you're not really taking advantage of the ramp aspect of it too much, but it is a kind of cool finisher for a miracle deck. Next we have Phenomenon Investigators. This is a 4 mana Dimir creature human detective. It's a 3/4, and as it enters, choose Believe or Doubt. So Believe is whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token, and Doubt is at the beginning of your end step, you may return a non-land permanent you own to your hand. If you do, draw a card. So Investigators is an interesting, flexible card that can work in aristocrat decks, or just works in like blink style decks, like bouncy style decks. The belief part works really well if you are going more aristocrats, like if you have a bunch of creatures on the battlefield that you want to be sacrificing, well, popping out a bunch of 2/2 creature tokens whenever you're sacrificing is quite nice. They're also enchantments, so they also trigger like constellation effects, anything that triggers off enchantments entering the battlefield. Whereas the Doubt side is really good to reuse enter the battlefield or even leave the battlefield triggers, like returning a Muldrifter to your hand to draw 2 more cards, and also whenever you're bouncing, you get to draw cards as well. Next we have Soaring Lightbringer. This is a 5 mana white enchantment creature bird glimmer. It's a 4/5 with flying, and other enchantment creatures you control have flying. Whenever you attack a player, create a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature token that's tapped and attacking that player. So Soaring Lightbringer is a nice little buff effect for your enchantment creatures. It just gives them all evasion, and also it can make basically up to 3 enchantment creature tokens tapped and attacking every single attack phase, because if you have 3 opponents and you manage to attack all 3 of them, that's 3 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature tokens being created every single time you're going to combat, which is fine. For 5 mana, it seems a little bit overcosted. Like, one of the de facto best ways of an Enchantress deck to make a whole bunch of flying tokens is like Archon of Sun's Grace. Archon gets a lot better because it's 4 mana instead of 5. It's not an enchantment, so it doesn't trigger Constellation, but the creatures are 2/2s that it makes, and they always fly. Like, they don't stop flying once the creature that's making it leaves the battlefield. They just stop having lifelink. But I guess Soaring Lightbringer works really well with the Archon though, because it triggers Constellation, and then every single enchantment creature token it makes also triggers Constellation. So if I had to like choose one for an Enchantress style deck, it would always be Archon of Sun's Grace. But if I was very heavily invested in making creature tokens, I would put in Soaring Lightbringer as well. Next, we've got Fear of Sleep Paralysis. This is a 6 mana blue enchantment creature nightmare. It's a 6/6 with flying and has Eerie. Whenever it or another enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. And stun counters can't be removed from permanents your opponents control. So this is a top-end board control to just lock down your opponent's boards, essentially. Whenever another enchantment or itself enters, you're stunning all these creatures, but even better, as long as Fear of Sleep Paralysis is on the battlefield, those stun counters are never being removed. Those creatures are never untapping. They're just permanently tapped down and unable to block, unable to attack, unable to tap for activated abilities or whatever. It's great. And then it's also a flying 6/6, so it's even a clock too. It's a lot of mana at 6 mana, but keep in mind that if you miracle it out with Aminatou, for example, you can cast this for as little as 2 mana, which is absolutely ridiculous. This card is definitely a removal magnet, but I think it's well worth it and well cost efficient because it just locks down the entire table. What can your opponents really do about it? They have to remove it, and if they can't, then you're probably going to win the game pretty quickly, honestly. Like, all your creatures can just attack freely, and you also have a bonus 6/6 flyer as well too. So just really good card. Next, we have a new miracle card. This is Metamorphosis Fanatic. It's a 6 mana black 4/4 creature human lifelink. When it enters, return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. But instead of paying 6 mana, if you miracle it out, it only costs 2 mana. Which is fantastic. So obviously in a miracle deck, if you can get this out for 2 mana very consistently, this card is just phenomenal. Like, imagine miracling this out in response to your opponents attacking you, and then boom, all of a sudden you have a 4/4 lifelinker, surprise blocker, plus whatever you reanimate, also with lifelink, so you could ambush potential attackers, kill them, and also get a whole bunch of life in the process. Like, that's obviously the dream. But just whenever you're casting this for 2 mana, having a 4/4 lifelink body, and then reanimating something that also will have lifelink on top of it is just insane value. So yeah, this card is just fantastic in miracle decks. If you can't miracle it consistently, not a good card, but it's just very solid at 2 mana for sure. Next, we have another new miracle card. This is Redress Fate. This is an 8 mana white sorcery that says return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, but instead of paying 8 mana, you could always miracle it out for just 4 mana, which is very good. It's just very good. In an Enchantress deck, obviously, this is going to be one of the best cards you could be running if you can miracle it out very consistently, like this deck is meant to do. If you can do that for its miracle cost, it's like strictly a better replenish, which is one of the best Enchantress spells in the game. It's also the reserve list, so it's incredibly expensive. But yeah, doing a replenish at basically instant speed is just fantastic for an Enchantress deck, and it's going to be one of the best cards in the Miracle deck. If you're not focusing on replenish, though, the closest analog is going to be Brilliant Restoration, which does the exact same thing. It returns all enchantments, yes, but it also returns all artifacts. If you're an artifact deck, for example, you have to pay 7 mana, though, for this effect, for this exact text. You have to pay 7, and this is 8, so it's actually not even that much overcosted compared to Brilliant Restoration, which is a card I think is fairly costed. It only came out like 2 years ago or so, so it's a fairly modern card too in terms of checking out its mana value and how appropriately costed it is in 2024. Redress Fate, just 1 more mana if you hard cast it, so it's not the worst thing in the world to do. But then you can miracle it on top of it. So I think Redress Fate might even be good enough to seriously consider in decks that are already running Brilliant Restoration and aren't really miracle decks. Like, if you could just randomly, top deck this, and on your first draw of your turn, you get to miracle it out for 4 mana, and sometimes you have a bunch of stuff in your graveyard that you want to get back. Like, that's just gravy, right? So yeah, this card is good, and it's one of the few cards I would consider like outside of a miracle deck, maybe, if you're already running Brilliant Restoration. Okay, and the last 2 cards are 2 new rooms, and in editing mode, I'm going to flip it up so you can read it really nicely. But for me, I'm seeing it sideways, so I'm gonna have to tilt my head very awkwardly to read these cards. So, rooms are new enchantment card types in Duskmourn. They're essentially like fused cards. Like, they have basically 2 cards put together, and you cast them from your hand. Choosing one of the sides, one of the rooms. So in this case, there's Secret Arcade or Dusty Parlor. So you either cast Secret Arcade for 5 mana or Dusty Parlor for 3 mana. And then when it is on the battlefield at sorcery speed, you could pay the mana to unlock the other room and get its effect. So for example, if you pay 5 mana for Secret Arcade to cast it from your hand, at sorcery speed, you could then pay an additional 3 mana to unlock Dusty Parlor, and then suddenly you get both effects of the card instead of just one side. So Secret Arcade says, it's a 5 mana white enchantment room, and it says, non-land permanents you control and permanent spells you control are enchantments in addition to their other types. And then Dusty Parlor says, for 3 mana, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that spell's mana value on up to 1 target creature. So Dusty Parlor is a nice, like, kind of growing finisher for an Enchantress deck. You beef up all your small creatures, so then they become more and more imposing blockers, but then eventually they can also start attacking for lethal damage. That's always great to see. And it's particularly good in a Miracle deck because we're going to be casting very expensive enchantments for less mana. That's the whole point of Aminatou, is that 4 mana discount. But, you know, even if we're casting a 6 mana enchantment for 2 mana off Aminatou's Miracle ability, we're still getting 6 +1/+1 counters off Dusty Parlor, which is fantastic value. And then Secret Arcade is basically an Enchantress's Presence, but just for yourself, and it also doesn't count your lands. So it's a great way of triggering additional constellations, I guess. If you're playing like creatures or other permanents that are not enchantments, suddenly they are enchantments, so they trigger constellation. But they also work even better with Dusty Parlor because now suddenly everything you're casting will trigger Dusty Parlor. So again, it becomes even stronger. So yeah, this is a great like pseudo rolling finisher, snowballing finisher in the deck. The next room is Cramped Vents and Access Maze. So Cramped Vents, 4 mana black, and it says when you unlock this door, this room deals 6 damage to target creature an opponent controls. You gain life equal to the excess damage dealt this way. And then Access Maze, 7 mana black. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand by paying life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. Okay, so this one I think is a little bit overcosted. I really wish Cramped Vents just gave you flat life gain total, not equal to the excess damage. Like if it was just like, you'll deal 6 damage, gain 6 life for 4 mana at sorcery speed, I think that's actually quite reasonable. This way, that side kind of sucks. I mean, it's still removal, it's fine on an enchantment too. And then Access Maze, I also feel is a little bit overcosted. 7 mana is a whole bunch, but again, the whole point of the deck is to miracle them out for 4 mana less. So if you're miracling it out instead of 7 mana, you're only paying 3, like 1 in double black, and that's much more reasonable. So yeah, I think it's good. It's very good in this particular deck. Any way of like cheating out on the mana cost, I think these cards are a little bit overcosted, honestly. But if you can cheat them out, either with miracling them out or just like reanimating them or putting them from your hand onto the battlefield for free or whatever, then it gets a lot better. Actually, putting it from the battlefield, from your hand to the battlefield is not good because you actually have to cast it or else you don't get to open any rooms. So it's not really good cheating it out outside of Miracle. It's only good with Miracle, I think. Okay. Yeah, it's whatever, fine. All right, so we just looked at all 10 of the brand new cards exclusive to the deck, and now we're going to check out the rest of the deck list, the reprints. Keep in mind that the card versions you're going to be seeing here are not going to be the same ones you're going to be seeing in the precon itself. The cards in the precon will have normal frames for one. They'll also all have the exact same set symbol of the precon, and they also might feature different artwork. And the reason why I can't show you the actual card versions that you're going to see in the precon itself is because I'm trying to get these videos out as quickly as possible, and we just haven't uploaded all those card images yet. We have to wait until Wizards of the Coast actually uploads the card images to their image gallery, which can take, you know, a day or two, and that's just way too long. So I just have to show you whatever card versions I have available. Apologies for that, but now let's look at the reprints. And I'm going to be starting with the top 4 most expensive reprints, at least at the time of the deck list being showcased. Obviously, these card prices are going to go down as the precon gets released and people start buying them. But for now, the top 4 most expensive cards, the most expensive card currently is Inkshield at a price of $13. This is one of my favorite cards in Magic the Gathering, so I'm very, very excited to see this reprinted. Sheldon Menery designed Inkshield 2, if my memory serves me correctly. So thank you, Sheldon, for what you've done for Commander and also for printing one of my favorite cards in Magic. It's awesome. Then the next most expensive card is Extravagant Replication. It's currently $10 and it's great in the deck. It's another expensive enchantment that you can cast instead of 6 mana hard casting it. You could actually miracle out for just 2 mana and it has a cool effect. Then Hall of Heliod's Generosity. We usually don't see expensive lands printed in these precons, but this one is a very cool one that I'm happy to see over here. It just works really well with Enchantress. You can put enchantment cards from your graveyard to the top of your library, and it works incredibly well with the miracle mechanic, obviously, because then you can miracle out the top card that you put on top of your library. You put the enchantment on top of your library, then draw a card at instant speed, or just draw your first card for that turn, and then boom, you can miracle it out. Like you put an Extravagant Replication from your graveyard on top of your library, and then you cast it for 2 mana again. Awesome reprint. Really, really smart to put it here. And then Ondu's Spirit Dancer is a card that was printed first in a Commander precon, I think a year ago. It hasn't seen a reprint since then. It's very, very popular, so it's been creeping up in price. So I'm glad to see it over here. Now for the rest of the reprints, I'm just going to be starting from the lowest mana value to the highest mana value, and starting with creatures. So starting with lowest mana value creatures to the highest mana value creatures, and then going to instant sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, and then finally lands. All right, so we got Starfield Mystic, which is a staple in Enchantress decks. It's just a really good mana efficient ramp source. Auramancer is fine. I don't really put in my Enchantress decks, but it does a job. British Heart is like meh to me. Mesa Enchantress is another staple. You know, you just want to have all the Enchantresses to draw all the cards. Really nice. Moonblast Cleric is fantastic in this deck. It's like a lower tier tutor effect in most decks, but in a Miracle deck where you actually want enchantments on top of your library, this is actually sometimes better than putting it in your hand if you have Aminatou out, for example. So this card's really, really good. And typically the precons don't run tutors outside of like basic land tutors because, you know, these are meant to be kind of introductory decks, and you don't really want to have a bunch of tutor effects for people who have never played the deck before. You know, like, what am I supposed to tutor for? But I think they made an exception here because Moonblast Cleric just works so well with our commander, so it's such a slam dunk here. Verge Rangers, not an amazing card, I think, even in the best of times, but it is kind of cool because you get to always look at the top card of your library, so you can anticipate when you're going to be setting up a miracle effect. So not a great card on its own, but it makes sense in this style of deck. Nightmare Shepherd is cute. It works really well with managing ETB effects, like, you know, your Moonblast Cleric dies, and then you get to make a copy of it, and then its ETB triggers again. So it's really solid there. Psalm Simulacrum's also solid. Doomwake Giant's one of the best cards in Enchantress. It's just like a one-sided board wipe, asymmetrical board wipe that just keeps happening over and over again until your opponents find a way to actually deal with the giant. So if you're slinging together multiple enchantments, like all your opponents' smaller creatures and then medium-sized creatures are all just going to keep dying over and over while your stuff is totally fine. I love this card. Prognostic Sphinx, it's an okay card, but gets a lot better because Scrying is top deck manipulation, and that means it's setting up your miracles with Aminatou. That's always great. Archetype of Imagination is another kind of overcosted enchantment that costs only 2 mana when you have Aminatou out, which makes it suddenly very, very good. Aetherios, I think it's like just a generally decent card that just gets so much better because, again, you could cast it for 2 mana instead of 6 with Aminatou out. Demons of Fate's Design, another slam dunk in Aminatou. Instead of 6 mana, you pay for 2 mana if you miracle it out, and it also has that effect of being able to ramp out other things in your hand. I don't see a lot of lifelink in this deck, so it does make me a little bit nervous if there's a lot of ways of paying life to get powerful effects, because how do you replenish it? But maybe we'll see them in later on in the reprints. Dream Eater, it's okay, but it does Surveil 4, so it does work again with this top deck manipulation that we want. Arvinox, I don't think I've ever seen reprinted outside of like the bonus sheet or whatever, or the list, I think it's called. So it's cool to see it over here. It's not a bad card. Brainstorm, one of the best cards in a Miracle deck, absolutely bar none. Otherworldly Gaze, it's like a bad Brainstorm. It doesn't draw you a card, but it fulfills the same role of like we're doing top deck manipulation, and it has flashback. Ponder, excellent. Portent, excellent in top deck manipulation again. Swords of Plowshares, another staple. You love to see it. Arcane Denial, always love to see it. Also triggers card draw on your opponent's turn. Like let's say on an opponent's turn, you Arcane Denial something, and then the next opponent's turn, you get to draw a card, and that might trigger Miracle, which is really nice to see. Diabolic Vision, just a slam dunk in Miracle decks. Telling Time, same thing. Entry to Angels, just a Miracle card. It's okay. It's fine. I guess when you Miracle it out, then you put like pay 6 mana, put 4 Angel creature tokens at instant speed on the battlefield. It's actually pretty decent, I think. Then Read the Bones is fine. Thirst for Meaning is fine. I love instant speed draw effects because those are allowing you to Miracle on your opponent's turns as well. Return to Dust, I'm surprised this year. I think this card, I haven't seen this card played for like at least like 6 years. I feel like it's been power crept out long ago. Same thing with Underend, I think. I think well, maybe that one has more of a pass. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why these cards are here. I feel like they're kind of power crept out of the format. Time Wipe, pretty solid. You need to have board wipes, and this one can save Aminatou, which is like the only creature you really care about in this deck. Terminus, another great Miracle card. Aminatou's Augury, you love to see it. It's not like super great in this particular deck, but you know, it's Aminatou. It's her signature spell. It's cool. Brainstone is just a bad Brainstorm, but you know, it's still a Brainstone. So it's still fine. It's still very good in this deck. Then we have just generic, you know, ramp stuff, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Azorius Signet, Mind Stone, Orzhov Signet, great, Commander Sphere, meh, whatever. And then we get to the good stuff, the enchantments. So Mirror Maid, just copy the best enchantment or artifact on the battlefield, solid. Monologue Tax, I've never been super impressed with this card. I'm surprised it's $5. I guess I've just never seen a reprint. But yeah, it's whatever. Timely Ward, really good in this deck because you really want Aminatou on the battlefield. The deck is very heavily centered on Aminatou, so being able to just put it indestructible on her or whatever important thing you have on the battlefield at any time, at Flash even, is really nice. Cast Out is nice because it's flexible removal at instant speed, but it can also cycle, so it can actually trigger Miracle on your opponent's turns as well. Then there's Life Insurance, it's fine. Sigil of the Empty Throne, it's a staple in Enchantress. Sphere of Safety, another staple. Spirit Sister's Call is a really cute one, especially with our secondary commander, because the more stuff you have in the graveyard, the more sweet options you have to, you know, reanimate with Spirit Sister's Call. So I think it's a little bit better with the secondary commander than the first primary commander, but it's still a cool card. I absolutely love the art too. Then we've got the Eldest Reborn, just like an amazing card to Miracle for just 1 mana. Super cool. Bottomless Pool is a new room that's quite good in the deck. Shark Typhoon, another card that, oh, I can't wait to Miracle out. And also can cycle too, so it can set up Miracles itself too on your opponent's turns. And then another great one to Miracle out, one of the Multiverse, not quite Omniscience, but still very, very good to just Miracle out for 4 mana. And then talking about the lands very briefly, most of the lands are not very exciting. They're just there to mana fix. Obviously, Hall of Heliod's Generosity is by far the coolest one, and we already covered that one in the top reprints. But other notable ones are also a little bit of top deck manipulation. The Temple Cycle, so Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, and Temple of Silence. Typically, I don't really like these cards because I don't really like tapped mana fixing lands unless they're like the Tri-lands, for example. But these all ETB scry, so obviously they get tremendously better if you actually care about the top card of your library, like the Miracle deck. Same thing with Halimar Depths. It lets you look at the top 3 cards and rearrange them, so it's even better top deck manipulation. It doesn't mana fix and it still enters tapped, but I think its ETB ability is really, really good in this deck. Alright, so that is Miracle Worker. Initial thoughts? Personally, I'm kind of tired of Enchantress precons. I feel like they've been done to death already like 2 years ago. I feel like 2 years ago they were already done to death, and then we got like 1,000 more. But nonetheless, I really like this one because I really like the miracle mechanic. I think it's a really cool take on draw go. It's just an interesting mechanic, and it's a really cool build around where you're focusing on stuff to miracle out, but you're also focusing on top deck manipulation and then drawing on your opponent's turns for maximum value. It's a really cool balancing act that I love designing decks around. So in terms of excitement, I'm definitely much more excited for this deck than the Manifest Dread Landfall +1/+1 counter deck that we covered last time, which was Jump Scare. And I also think this deck is a lot more focused than the Simic deck. The primary focuses are Enchantress and Miracle, and there's not really a third theme kind of gumming things up. Obviously, the secondary commander focuses more on having a full graveyard, but you don't see a whole bunch of cards that actually support that over here. Like, it's not really a graveyard deck, and the secondary commander still works very well with the main themes of the deck. Like, obviously, you're going to have a bunch of enchantments in your graveyard eventually over time, and then that secondary commander allows you to just, you know, cast some of those things from the graveyard. So it's graveyard recursion for an Enchantress deck, which this deck is. So yeah, while I'm personally not super hyped about Enchantress, I am super hyped for Miracle, and I think this is a really cool take on Miracle, and it's the very first time that we've ever seen Miracle supported in a Commander precon. So for me at least, 2 thumbs up. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of Miracle Worker. We have 2 more Duskmourn Commander precons to be revealed, and I'm going to make a video on both of them as they get revealed. And then after that, I have a lot of Duskmourn content ready to go. So if you like the sound of all those things, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a video. So until next time, friends, see ya!